welcome all of you. Proximity is key to life at Justice Defenders. Pre-pandemic, we love to get together to break bread as people in prison, prison officers, lawyers, judges, and allies. Anderson, thank you for being with us. We know that you came to hear about our work from Michael Gavshon, producer of 60 Minutes, who read about us in The Spectator a couple of years ago, when he first told you that there was this group of prisoners and prison officers and allies working together as paralegals and studying law in prisons in Uganda and Kenya. What did you make of it?
You know, Michael Gavshon is sort of a legendary producer at 60 Minutes and worked with an idol of mine, Bob Simon, who was a correspondent for many years at CBS. And, you know, he came across this article. He and I had worked together in prisons in Malawi, probably 2 or 3 years ago, on a story about a man who finds musicians in prison and records them, and has albums that have been released, and one was nominated for a Grammy. And Michael knows that I'm always looking for stories in various countries in Africa. I love traveling there, and I love, looking for stories that people don't really know about, particularly organizations that are doing remarkable things. And so when he told me about what you were doing, and then I read a couple of articles about it, and I knew it would be an amazing experience at the very least. And so we went it was my Thanksgiving vacation. I can only, because I work at CNN, I can only go work for 60 Minutes on vacations. So usually like Thanksgiving, Christmas, I often go shoot a story over the holiday. So it was, we spent Thanksgiving with you in the prisons, and it was an amazing experience. And it was really right before the pandemic. So I'm glad we were able to do it when we did. And yeah, it was one of those experiences where it's, you know, transformative, and you can't help but be moved and shocked and want to get involved when you see, you know, when you meet Alexandra up close. I mean, frankly, a lot of my initial reaction was based on meeting Alexander, who I think is kind of one of the more remarkable people I've ever met. And then meeting some of the prisoners who are working as paralegals and working as lawyers. It's just an amazing experience. And not only as a storyteller, but just as a human being wanting to be involved with it after the story was done.
Some of our community here have spent time with us in prisons, but most haven't. I remember being bundled in the back of a taxi with you and Michael and the 60 Minutes team going to Committee Maximum Prison in Nairobi the day that you arrived. What did you make of that first visit to Committee as a maximum security prison? I remember we watched a mock court there. Many people wanted to speak with you. What impression did that?
Yeah, it was incredible to see the mock court, which helps everybody kind of, who are prisoners and guards basically learn about court procedure. And for those who haven't seen it, it's, there are people who play the defense attorneys and people who are the prosecutors and judges, and somebody gets to play somebody accused of a crime, and they go through what a trial is like. And it was our first day of shooting. So it was really the first exposure I'd had to prisons in Kenya. And I wasn't really sure what to expect. As I said, I'd seen prisons in Malawi. I've seen them in Haiti, and obviously in the United States as well. Prisons are made up of human beings, and they're made up of some people who have done terrible things and some people who have not, and some people who shouldn't be there and some people who should be there, and guards from all different walks of life who are there. And but to visit is to humanize. Visiting and actually seeing the work up close, you realize these are all individual people, and each one has different stories. And I think it's a powerful thing that you're doing, which is to not be the ones deciding, well, we think this is the person. You're not judging the person. You're believing that everybody deserves a fair hearing. And I think that's, it probably would have been easier for you as an organization to not only decide, well, we're about about the finding people who are innocent and getting them released, which is obviously a really important and valid thing to do. But this notion of serving others and wanting to have everybody get a fair hearing, guilty or not, how can you really know unless you have a fair hearing? And I think that's something that is fundamental and really important.
Talking about fair hearings and the power of storytelling, as a community of paralegals and lawyers, we're trying to learn to listen really deeply so we can work effectively on the thousands of cases that we work on each year. St. Benedict spoke about listening with the ear of our hearts. One of the things that struck me observing you in prisons was how deeply you listened to those you were interviewing, but those you were speaking to in passing as well, and how powerfully that can make people feel seen and known. Who or what taught you to be a great listener?
Well, thank you. I don't know that I am, but I think it's what I love about what I do, particularly when I'm, when I've actually left my environment and gone to some other place to bear witness to what is happening and talk to people, is the feeling of being immersed into something and transformed by that, and having these transformational experiences. And so for me, key to that is, if I'm going to go to some place, I want to be fully present in the conversations I have with people, and particularly in a place where people have not been listened to, or where people have not been seen. And there's a lot of people who in prison who, haven't had, many people in their lives see them or care about them, or, listen to what they have to say. And, look, some people are jerks, and you listen to them and you realize, okay, well, there's a reason that they may be here, or in whatever the circumstance is. But, everybody has a story, and I think there's value in hearing other people's stories and walking in other people's shoes. It's very easy, I think, in this time, and particularly in news in America and on cable, is to, to judge other people and take a political stance and yell about it. But to actually encourage people to walk in somebody else's shoes before making a judgment, and maybe not even make a judgment, just walk in somebody else's shoes and see something through their eyes. I think that, for me, just personally, that's been something I've always done, always wanted to do. I mean, not certainly as a journalist. And earlier, the first kind of journalist role model I ever had and met was a man named Gordon Parks, who was the first Black photographer for Life magazine. He's the first Black man to be allowed to direct a major motion picture in Hollywood. He directed Shaft. He was a very close friend of my mom's. He was at our house all the time. And he was the first journalist I saw up close. And so much of his work was about, fighting with his camera, fighting racism with his camera, but also, documenting the lives of people who wouldn't ordinarily turn up in pages of Life magazine or wherever it was.
How do you keep yourself open? You spoke about being fully present where you are, and being open to people regardless of who they are. At Justice Defenders, we talk about solidarity, and we have this idea that as a community of people, from prisons to palaces, and very different circumstances around the world, we might be open to each other and open to being transformed by each other. But sometimes it's hard work, especially, I think, if you're moving between communities and many different people from different backgrounds. How do you stay open to people and not to jump to judgments about them?
That is something I've thought a lot about, and I don't know that I am able to do that, but to the extent that I am, a lot of it is when I first started, I was by myself. I left college. I, basically had gotten a fake press pass from a friend of mine at a show that I was working at as a fact checker. And I borrowed a camera from them, and I just started I snuck into Myanmar, went and hooked up with some students fighting the government. Ended up in Somalia and later Rwanda and South Africa a lot, and Sarajevo, and was, seeing things which were just extraordinary and horrific. And you couldn't help but be fully present and fully Well, fully present. The thing I came to kind of understand is that you're doing, if your job is to be in a place to document what it's like so that other people will kind of feel it and understand it. If you can't feel it yourself, then you're not going to do justice to what the people whose story, to the people whose stories you're trying to tell. And I would meet reporters on the road who are very sort of, sarcastic and hard bitten, and they'd traveled the world and they'd done this, and they were comparing, oh, this place is not as bad as Sarajevo was in 92. And, and I found it really inappropriate to be kind of have a sliding scale of sorrow when comparing tragedies. And I think you should see everything every time with fresh eyes. And you should, if you're not shocked by, a pile of bodies on the side of a road or a room full of 120 prisoners who, are going to be there for years just waiting for a hearing, then you shouldn't be there, because you're not going to do any justice to them, and it's not fair. So I think that's, and it's something I also got from my mom, who, was this extraordinary woman who kind of had great tragedies and great losses in her life. And, her greatest strength was being open and vulnerable through it all. Like most people would have become very hard bitten and, a tough survivor. She was a survivor, but she was very vulnerable and open. And I think that's the way, yeah, I admire that.
I'd love to hear about how she did it and how you do it. Oscar Wilde said about prison, the problem with prisons isn't that they break our hearts are made to be broken, but rather they turn our hearts to stone. And I think it must be the case for someone who intentionally goes into areas of war or suffering. And you spoke about the pain and the tragedy you've seen. What practices do you have, and what practices do your mum have when it comes to keep your heart soft and not becoming jaded or bitter or hard?
Yeah, I did find, I mean, after a couple of years when I first started out, that I realized I needed to do a variety of different kinds of reporting, because if all you do is war reporting or conflict zones, which there are some people who that is what they've done, it doesn't end very well for you. I mean, most of the people I know who've done that, it takes a toll, and you don't last very long ultimately. And it's obviously physically a great risk, but just mentally it's difficult. And I think most people at a certain point either get out of it altogether or come up with some way that you can kind of intersperse it with other kinds of reporting. And that's what I've tried to do. And, I'm not always successful in remaining open and vulnerable. It's sometimes, it gets to be too much, and like you can't, to get to kind of remain vulnerable to people who are not going to end up well, or are in a very desperate situation. And you can sort of predict how things are going to go and how your interaction with them is going to go and how it's going to end. And that's the only solution I found is just to kind of not have it be something I do all the time, and at least not use it. I think early on I used it as an escape to escape the reality of my own life. I was just traveling all the time and going to places where they were so intense and so overwhelming and incredible and impactful and transformative that my regular life couldn't compare. And all I wanted to do, I was very unhappy when I was traveling because they were very difficult places I was in. I was very sad, but when I got home, I couldn't speak the same language as other people and, my friends, and I just wanted to be back out somewhere. And that that just took mentally a long time to kind of figure out, like, I need to build up a life of my own and have, certainly now having a child and all that is a great, I have a reason to be home and a life, which is, and which makes actually my reporting probably even better, or helps me improve.
How's life changed since you became a dad?
It's gotten a lot better. I mean, it's begun is really what it is. I mean, yeah, I don't know what I've been doing all this time. It's been incredible. I mean, I was very, I've always wanted to have a kid from the time I was little, and my dad was a great dad, and it was something I didn't really think would be possible. And then I wanted to make sure that I was, stable in all realms, that I could have a kid and be present. And I wanted to be the kind of dad that my dad was. So, yeah, I wish I'd maybe done it 10 years earlier, but it's incredible. It's such a joy. And I love waking up in the morning before him and being there when he opens his eyes. And when I open up the door and go in, the room is still dark. And for some reason, he sneezes every time. And I think it's the cutest thing. And yeah, so everything about it, I just am completely besotted.
Yeah, yeah, it's such a gift, and it's a beautiful thing to raise a child. Sometimes I find that I worry a bit about the world that my children are going into and what I can do to guide them. And especially, it feels in America there's a lot of division at the moment, and racial division. And we've been looking at the Black Lives Matter movement and what's been happening since George Floyd's death. Reflect on our own work and whether it's possible to have peace without justice. When it comes to the situation today in America, especially around race and racial reconciliation, what makes you hopeful?
I mean, what makes me hopeful, honestly, are places like South Africa and even Rwanda. Rwanda. I mean, I traveled in Rwanda a lot before the genocide. I went there when I was 17, and I rode in a truck across sub-Saharan Africa, and had gone back to Rwanda repeatedly because it's a country I find really interesting, and I was there very briefly during the genocide, just for about a day, which was pretty horrific. But in a tiny country where 800,000 to 1 million people were killed in 100 days in very personal killing without bombs and bullets, it was largely knives and machetes and clubs with nails hammered into them. That the main prison in Kigali, was completely overwhelmed after the genocide, and there was no justice system that could handle all the people who had been involved in the genocide. And so it became the system, which you probably know better than I do, which was very village based, and it was village courts, and they had to figure out a way to have some kind of justice, but also allow people. The reality is people are still going to be living in the same place where they killed somebody. And but a place like that, and obviously Rwanda has its own issues with its with its leadership and things like that. But South Africa having the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and obviously nothing is perfect, but those, we have seen places where, Ireland, Northern Ireland, I worked there back in the troubles, or in the early 90s. And, to think that's obviously, I was just there, I don't know, a year or two ago, and obviously there's still stuff going on in Belfast and Northern Ireland, but it's not what it was. So change is possible. And I mean, that's something I think you see and you believe in very much. And you see the change in people.
Yeah, and sometimes it comes from reaching breaking point. We've been approached about working in Rwanda, where prisons have been totally overwhelmed. But I think that adversity caused creativity in thinking about how to deliver justice to huge numbers of people who've been arrested and imprisoned. And as justice defenders, we're spending a lot of time now reflecting on how the creativity and innovation and commitment, solidarity that we see in the prisons we work in might speak into criminal justice systems beyond America.
I mean, anytime anybody visits a prison, it is a very, as we said, it opens your eyes to so many different things. I think to actually see the level of the sheer number of people who wait for years and years and years just to get in front of a judge, who have no idea about how to behave in court, what to do in court, that the fact they may even, be allowed to speak if there's not somebody defending them, and how to go about speaking, and how, even with a few weeks of training, paralegals through your course can know enough that, and there's only so much anybody can learn in a few weeks, but the fact that that is enough information to help them advise other people about how they can be in court, and that can actually lead to people getting released because that's all it takes. Showing somebody how to communicate or how to behave in a courtroom. That's extraordinary. That's revolutionary. It's remarkable.
I think the secret to our work is trying to listen deeply to those with lived experience. The rest of our staff who've not been in prison, I think, are shaped deeply by our people in prison and from prison. They're transforming us, and we're learning from them. In my 18 years of doing this work, people in prison have been my great teachers, and so I just count myself fortunate to be on this journey with them and with you now, Anderson.
But yeah, I think, there's so many people's stories. Morris Kabira's story is just extraordinary, who we profiled in the 60 Minutes piece. He'd been a police officer, accused of a crime, arrested, on, death row, thought his life was over, was in the depths of depression and in prison. And then to not only, go through the legal training, become an attorney, but to be able to be helped by others in this program to defend himself and argue his case. And I can't remember how many years he was in. I think it was 8 or 9, maybe. But yeah, to hear his story, and then for him to be able to get out of prison, and then turn around and go back into prison. We went back to the same prison that he had been in, where which was a really tough prison for him. And for him to, I think that's the thing that struck me about Justice Defenders, this whole idea that Alexander talks about of service and serving others. It's not just talk with him and with Miriam and the others. That's what this organization is all about. And you see that in prisoners, and even prisoners who are not able to get out, who are, they feel part of them becomes free when somebody that they have helped gets out. And that's an extraordinary thing to witness.
We all know you, we all know how impactful the work that you do is. And the work has wide reach. And in this case, you can really change the trajectory of our organization, of other NGOs as well. So what is your take on perhaps strategically covering certain topics to give such issues or organizations more exposure?
Yeah, there's nothing more I like than finding a great organization and figuring out a way to tell a story that that captures people's attention and can make a difference with that organization. It's difficult at times because there's some organizations who are doing great work, but it's difficult to figure out a way to make a story that captures people. Some organizations are doing important advocacy work, but to actually see results that you can document and stories you can kind of follow, it's not always that simple. And I wish it were. We do a thing at CNN Heroes, which is about finding people who, in ways large and small, are doing great things in their communities and don't have huge resources, and trying to give them attention and global attention, and then get more resources. But it's for 60 Minutes. It is sometimes hard to figure out a way to package is the wrong thing, but to actually go and kind of document the chain. And my producer Michael, I think worked with Alexander and Miriam, the whole team, for a long time of sort of figuring out, okay, well, what prisons to go to and who to talk to, and then there's a lot that goes into it.
Yes, Absolutely understand the audience. We always have to have the audience in mind. And even here, we are many from the US, and many questions come for Alexander and also Miriam in terms of whether justice defenders will soon move to the US or what the plans are in that regard. Alexander.
It's a tough one. I spent time in about 130 prisons in 17 different countries. I've seen suffering which has broken my heart and made me cry many times. I think I've never seen anything as dehumanizing as visiting a death row inmate in Texas who was in this cell without a window, with a door made out of bars and then another door made out of solid metal. And for 45 minutes a day, he could walk up and down in a corridor in chains. I thought so much money has been spent to create this prison to totally dehumanize this fellow. And when I was 18 and first went to Uganda, I became friends with the executioner. I got to know him really well. We became close friends. But I understood what impact it had guarding and killing people. And it prompted me to spend time doing research. And I spoke to many people involved in executions in America. I got struck by, in many ways, a level of structural inhumanity, which seemed to be the case in many American prisons, and by high levels of tension, and almost, from my understanding, a total lack of trust between prisoners and prison officers. And it seemed that prisoners were really feared. And so, as much as America is a vast country, with many organizations doing great work in prisons, and we're a little organization trying to figure out what we have to offer. These approaches from America come again and again and again from individuals and groups of prisoners and groups of ex-prisoners, and trying to ask, well, what do we have to offer and how? And especially when it comes to creating unlikely allies and building common cause and adversarial justice systems and bringing together people who are meant to hate each other in love, to come together to serve. And so we're excited about the incredible support we're receiving from Americans who fund our work and back us and tell our stories. And we're thinking carefully about what opportunities there could be to respond to these constant requests which are coming to do work there.
There's that great video that you guys have, which if some people haven't seen it, I'm not sure, it's maybe on your Instagram or website, but where a woman who's been counseled by your paralegals finds out on video that she is going to get released. And not only her excitement, but the excitement of other prisoners who are out in an open area outside waiting to hear the news, and also the excitement of the guards who, are hugging this woman, crying along with her. It is extraordinary to see, and I think, Alexander, what you said is very perceptive about, prisons in the US. There is such a divide between prisoners and guards, and I'm sure that there are many guards who would like to have a different experience and different capabilities with prisoners. Obviously, as you said, it's about finding a place that's where the leadership is open to the idea, and I imagine that would be quite difficult. But it seems like just watching it in the prisons in Kenya, to have buy-in from the warden, to buy-in from some of the, not all the guards are, probably wanting to do it, but those who do, it's an incredible thing to see guards working with inmates side by side studying. It's remarkable. I also just want to thank the folks who are watching, and I understand that a number of you have learned about the organization through the piece on 60 Minutes, and I can't tell you what it means to all of us who worked on the piece to know that, our hope in doing this was to shine a light on Miriam and Alexander and Matteo and their work. And I'm so glad that all of you responded to it. And I really, I don't get involved in most organizations that I report on after the story is done, but this is something I've seen firsthand, and I cannot tell you how impressed I am by the people involved. I find them hauntingly remarkable.
Anderson, thank you for being part of us. We're excited to be on this journey with you and to continue to plan with you more events like this and opportunities to get together in person. I definitely hope you'll be able to come and visit us in the Gambia soon. But we're grateful for you. We're grateful for you being an advocate for us and a member of our advocates community that sustains this work and makes it possible. Thank you to all of you here who are part of the advocates and part of the Solidarity, our club of regular givers. But we're grateful for each one of you. We're excited to continue coming together to dream about what it looks like to create a more just world. And thank you again to each of you for being with us. Take care.